For 30 years, the story of Kurt Cobain's death has been pretty much set in stone. The world was told it was a tragic suicide, but the sources we're about to dive into today, well, they present a totally different narrative. One filled with forensic anomalies, evidence that just doesn't add up, and a pretty shocking eyewitness account that challenges everything we thought we knew. Kurt Cobain was so much more than a musician. He was, reluctantly, the voice of a whole generation. As the frontman for Nirvana, his music just perfectly captured the angst and frustration of the early 90s. It completely tore up the pop charts and really redefined rock music for years to come.
And he died at just 27 years old, tragically joining that infamous 27 Club, that collection of legendary musicians whose lives were all cut way too short, right at the peak of their talent.
And that's really the heart of what we're exploring today. The official story was accepted almost right away, but the investigators and witnesses cited in our sources, they argue that the evidence left behind tells a completely different and, frankly, a much more sinister story.
Okay, so to really understand the controversy here, we've got to start by looking at the official account, the story that was established in the hours and days right after his body was found.
So the accepted timeline is pretty straightforward. Cobain leaves a rehab center in LA, flies back home to Seattle, and then basically disappears. A week later, on April 8th, an electrician finds his body in the greenhouse over his garage. The scene looks like a self-inflicted shotgun wound. There's a massive amount of heroin in his system, and a note is found nearby. The Seattle Police Department ruled it a suicide almost immediately. Case closed.
And this, right here, is where that official narrative really starts to fall apart. Sources claim that when you take a closer look at the forensics, the toxicology report, the weapon, the scene itself, some major inconsistencies start to pop up. So now we get to where investigators cited in our sources really started to pick apart the crime scene. They found things that they say just don't add up for a suicide. And it all starts with the toxicology.
Take a look at this number, 1.52 milligrams per liter. That's the amount of heroin that the official autopsy report says was found in Kurt Cobain's bloodstream. Now, to put that number into perspective, let's see what the experts have to say about it. Okay, so according to multiple experts cited in the source material, this is a mind-boggling overdose. They argue it's at least 3 times a normal lethal dose. An amount injected intravenously that would have made him unconscious almost instantly. So the huge question they raise is this: how could a person that out of it have the strength and coordination to then pick up a long shotgun, aim it, and pull the trigger?
And the weird details just keep piling up. The shotgun had been wiped totally clean. No usable fingerprints were found on it. Not even Kurt's. The pen that was stuck through the note? Same deal, no prints. Then there's the spent shell casing. It was found on the left side of his body, but that particular gun ejects shells to the right, a detail investigators say is completely inconsistent with a self-inflicted shot. And get this, his shoes were laced up tight, which makes that whole theory about him using his toe to pull the trigger, well, highly unlikely.
Even the cornerstone of the whole suicide theory, the note itself, is heavily disputed. Handwriting experts or sources cite argue that, the main body of the letter is definitely Kurt's handwriting, but it's all about him being disillusioned with music and quitting the band. The final 4 lines, the only lines that actually sound suicidal, appear to be written in a different hand altogether. And this is made even stranger by a claim from the family's own private investigator, Tom Grant, who says he found practice sheets of Kurt's handwriting in Courtney Love's belongings. The forensic questions are really compelling, right? But they all lead to an even bigger question. If this wasn't a suicide, who would have wanted Kurt Cobain dead, and why? Well, according to these sources, Kurt was at this huge turning point in his life, and the decisions he was about to make had massive financial consequences for the people around him. So the sources really lay out a clear step-by-step motive. Cobain was apparently telling people he was divorcing his wife, Courtney Love, and he'd even asked his attorney to start the process of removing her from his will. At the exact same time, he was ready to walk away from Nirvana and a $10 million tour offer, basically turning off a giant money faucet. If he'd gone through with all that, Love would have been cut off. But with his death ruled a suicide, she inherited his entire estate and the incredibly valuable rights to all of Nirvana's music.
So 2 people become really central to these final days. First, you have Tom Grant, the private investigator that Courtney Love herself hired. He got so suspicious that he actually started recording all his phone calls with her and her inner circle. Then you have Dylan Carlson, one of Kurt's best friends, who bought the shotgun just days before, the weapon that would end up being the centerpiece of the whole crime scene.
For years and years, the case against suicide was all circumstantial, you know? It was based on forensic analysis and alleged motives. It was just one theory against an official police ruling. But what if someone was actually there? And this is where the story takes a huge, dramatic turn. Decades after Cobain's death, a man named Joseph Burns came forward. He was a fellow musician in the Seattle scene, a friend of Kurt's, and he claims he was at the house and that he witnessed the murder. So, according to this witness, this is the alleged sequence of events. Kurt gets home from rehab really early on April 2nd, only to find his house is full of people. Later that night, a big argument breaks out. Then, around 2 a.m. on April 3rd, Burns claims 2 men attacked Kurt in the basement, held him down, and injected him with that fatal overdose of heroin. He says Kurt was then carried unconscious up to the greenhouse, and about 30 or 40 minutes later, a single gunshot was heard. This account places the time of death 2 full days earlier than the official coroner's report. And Joseph Burns names names. He alleges the 2 men who assaulted Kurt were his close friend, Dylan Carlson, and another musician, Mark Lanigan. He also identifies others who were allegedly there in the house, acting as accessories who stayed silent for decades. Now, it's really important to state that these are the direct allegations being made within the source materials we are explaining for you today. So where does all of this leave us? On one hand, you have an official, closed case of suicide. And on the other, you have a really detailed account of murder, supported by what investigators claim is some pretty damning forensic evidence.
Let's just break it down. The official story says suicide on April 5th, and they point to the note and the gun. The counter-narrative says murder on April 3rd, and they point to the incapacitating heroin dose, the total lack of fingerprints, and an eyewitness. One investigation was closed down in just a matter of hours. The other alleges that a crime scene was staged and that crucial evidence was ignored from the very beginning. The Seattle Police Department still stands by its original ruling, but for 30 years, these questions have refused to go away, fueled by the evidence presented in our sources today. And they leave us with one final haunting question. Was this a simple case of a flawed investigation that just missed the signs? Or was it something else entirely? A carefully orchestrated murder and a nearly perfect cover-up?